Our presenter is Joe Emert, and I want to say just a little bit about Joe. I've known Joe for a few years now, and I've really come to really appreciate what he's done for history in our area. I'm just going to give you a few points, and these are only a few of many that I could mention. But Joe has served as past president and on the board of directors of the East Tennessee Historical Society. He's a National Park Advisory Board member. He's on the board of directors of the Great Smoky Mountain Institute at Tremont. He chaired the group that built the Sam Houston statue that's in Maryville and another in Texas entitled "You Shall Hear of Me." If you haven't seen that, that's a beautiful statue, and we can talk more about that, but that's another day. He's also a graduate of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. He's retired from the medical service device industry, where he was very successful and has received many awards for his work there. And he and his wife Cindy have 2 grown sons, and they now reside in Blount County. And Joe, if you would, we'll turn the meeting over to you.
Again, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's a wonderful organization, and an organization I should have joined a lot sooner. I have ancestors buried in the park, and Frederick Emert, founder of Emert's Cove, I'm a direct descendant of, so our connection and roots run deep. The title of this talk, as you can see on the screen, is Resting Peacefully in the Smokies, and the documenting of the veterans' graves that were pretty much unrecognized as a group before. January 7th, 2020, I was asked to speak at the Tennessee Valley Veterans Business Job Fair in Knoxville by the director, Steve Stiltson. It was a job fair that was open to the public and especially veterans, and trying to get them connected with people that were hiring. I was asked to speak on young Sam Houston. As Randall alluded, we built a statue in Maryville. Sam lived in Maryville for 13 years, and during that time he had lived with the Cherokees for a while. He joined the U.S. Army there, and when he left town, some of his friends were giving him a hard time because he was joining as a private. Even though he could read and write, he could automatically been a lieutenant. But his friends were riding him for going in as a private, and he said, "You don't know me now, but you shall hear of me." And that was the title of the statue, and I think everyone has heard of Sam Houston and his job. After I spoke, this lady back here, Marilyn Childress, raise your hand, Marilyn, she's on the back row, came up and asked if I had knew if there was a list of veterans that were buried in the national park. And I said, no, I didn't know, but I would be glad to find it out. So I talked to people at the headquarters, Dana Sohn, and she did some research and said there's nothing like that, but she pointed me in the direction of Frank March, who's back here also. Frank, raise your hand, please. Thank you. Because of his work with Don Lockburn on a field guide to cemeteries of the Great Smoky Mountains. And you're going to see some of Frank's work in the presentation. And when this book is published, and it's been delayed ever since the pandemic we've gone through, but hopefully it's back on track, you'll see that it's going to be the best book of guides to all the cemeteries in the park. Frank hooked me up with Don Cassidy on the North Carolina side with friends of the Bryson City Cemetery who had done a lot of research on graves over there, along with Brian Aldridge, Henry Chambers from the North Shore Cemetery Group, Karen Marcus, Christine Proctor, and Carol Litchfield. And then also Sheila Evans, who's the DAR, I think, for Sevier and Cocke County.
Cocke.
Just Cocke. Well, she's taken pretty much a lot of the research on the Tennessee side with the Daughters of the American Revolution, along with Dwayne O'Neill, Ruth Matthews, Wilma Zabona, Ruth Davis, Beth Freeman, Judy McGaha. And then we had Rod Law, who's a Smoky Mountain volunteer in the Cades Cove area in the cemeteries. All I've done was get some things going and made some presentations to the group, but the work is done by these people right here. Wrong button. And that's who deserves all the credit. We did some initial research and came up with 163 graves, and we team had worked on this database, getting it up on the web, and we decided we'd go with it on July 3rd, right before July 4th, so we get some information out about it. And that was really our first public presenting of this website. Then we got a little bit of press in the Maryville Daily Times documenting the veterans, and then more local press, Sevierville, Newport, Bryson City. It was picked up also by the Tennessean. And then we got some more national exposure when Kim O'Connell came down from Washington, D.C. She's a writer for the National Park Traveler, which is an online magazine that talks about all the different parks in the country and the issues and projects they have going on. And Frank, my wife Cindy, myself, Rod Law, I think that was all that went that day, wasn't it, with Kim, and documented some graves in Cage Cove, and this is the article we got out of it in November. And then this past fall, we went around with this gentleman here, Mike Embry from Smoky's Life magazine, in the spring issue, hopefully due about any time. We went around to 5 different cemeteries, Sheila, Maryland, Frank, and some park, national park people. Went around about 5 different cemeteries, and this article I think is going to be a great article when Mike gets it published. And that's what this is all about, is just getting the word out, because every time we have an event or it gets some publicity, we get calls and emails, and we just got a list of 13 additional veterans that have been documented in Cott County. So and they've all been researched, and that's key. We want proof that these people were veterans. We're not taking the family stories as the only proof. We'd like to have additional documentation besides military grave markers. Sometimes those are wrong. It's very, very rare that they're wrong, but they have been wrong and misidentified. And at this time, we're not documenting home guard or local militia. During the Civil War, everybody was home guard. I mean, the list would be huge. But these are actually the veterans. So the bibliography, and this is all on the website, of some of the things we've done, the Fold 3, the military records from the Civil War, the World War I, World War II, local county historians documenting military records of some of their residents. Are these, I think, 38 sources that we're using to document that. Right now, we're at 209 as of February 17th, 2022. Again, we started out with 163, we're up to that. We've got 13 more, so the list continues to grow. And this is going to be a work in progress. We're going to find more and more as we go. The database is broken up by the counties in the park, and this map is on the website, and some of these are hard to see, but the cemeteries and graves are marked by these white dots on the map. Swain and Sevier have the most. Cock and Blunt are close, and Haywood has the least, but you can see that they're all over the park. And everything from a single grave to a huge cemetery like the Whaley Clemens. This is also on the database. This is the parks, and on the map, corresponds with the map, the numbers, but we've used the terms that the Park Service does on the IDing of the cemeteries. And then clicking on this will take you right to the cemetery and list everyone there that is in that cemetery. We also started documenting people that were born in the Smokies and that are buried elsewhere from dying in battle. These are mainly Civil War, but I think as we get more and more of the word out, we'll find more veterans that are buried in military cemeteries that were born in the area. And this is the web page for the database, friendsofthebccemetery.org, and that BC is for Bryson City. And technology's working right. I'll try to open it up. This page opens, and then in the lower part here we have veterans in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. We click on that and we open up to the web page. We explain some of this, what we're trying to do, a little bit of the history of how this got started, a table of contents that has, again, everything listed by county, more introduction into some of the techniques, and if we have someone to add, Don Cash over in Bryson City is controlling the database. We just want one source. We don't want it to be open source. We want this controlled and maintained so it just doesn't get full of undocumented people. Again, this is the web page, so all this information will be on there. And this is an example of Frank's work on the cemetery. We've got topographical maps. We've got great directions down to the foot of which way you go, where you turn. And then we get into the list of the veterans. Hilliard Allman, you'll see his is italicized a little bit. It's because Hilliard has a cenotaph and not an actual grave, and the cenotaph is just a marker without the body. And we've included those there in the database. But as you see, Henry Bohannon, Revolutionary War veteran, one of two in the park. The other was Hamby over in Cades Cove. So we have veterans from the Revolutionary War through Vietnam. And with the 15 active cemeteries that are still in the park, there could be some veterans buried from the Middle East wars here in the future. So the documentation for all this is key. I'll just click on this. In GR14, the Whaley Plymouth Cemetery, the park refers to it as the Whaley, and the local people refer to it as the Plymouth Cemetery, so we included both names. But Frank again has these incredible directions, 568 feet at 729 feet. Then he also has GPS coordinates on every cemetery. And then all the veterans listed in that cemetery and their war that they were a veteran of. And again, Henry is one of the two Revolutionary War veterans. And we initially had Union and Confederate listings broken down, but with some of the opposing views of certain groups, we decided just to list everyone as a Civil War veteran. In that way we can protect the graves and not expose them to unnecessary issues. And we'll make sure everyone gets this web page before we go. Also, behind the scenes, we've just have the names listed on the public database, but there's some Excel spreadsheets, and these are veterans in Tennessee. And we go to showing, and it's hard to see on this, but on this is how we document everything with all the bibliography we had with different military records. And then we, on this behind the scenes webpage, identify their units, especially in the Civil War, whether they were Union or Confederate. Also, what we use to document, and we even have some that have been on the webpage, but the documentation wasn't there to have them listed. It was mainly a family stories, or someone had just registered for the draft in World War II, was never drafted or never served, so we had to take those off. So we've got all this information, and so what do we do with it now that we've got it? We're getting the word out, and we hope to get more. The first event was in 2020, was Reach Across America, that Maryland Children's has organized. How many graves have you done?
We did 200, 2020.
200?
Yeah.
But that's just in the park.
Right.
But how many have you done?
In this past year, we did almost 400, counting the ones outside the park that we've had.
In adjoining the park, but do you have anything with the national cemeteries?
In the national cemeteries, there was over 18,000 in the three cemeteries that are in Knox County, the 2 state cemeteries and the national one. The national cemetery is the oldest national cemetery in the country, and it's got over 9,000 graves there, and it's full. There's no more room for any anymore. And this past year, 2021, was the first time that every single grave in those 3 cemeteries we actually got covered with a wreath.
So you can see Maryland's a very busy lady, and Maryland has ancestors buried in the park and ancestor veterans buried in the park.
Bohannon,
Yeah.
he's my patriot.
And so you can see this is a real passion with Maryland Reach Across America. Now some of these involve 8-mile hikes in and out one way, so we have volunteers taking them in. And on the North Shore, sometimes the closest way is to get in a boat and ride for an hour. And then that time of year, the lake's going to be down, so you have to walk up the exposed shoreline up to where the trails start. I think this is Brad Free taking some, Ranger Brad Free, carrying some.
No. That is the that's Brad Redding.
Brad Redding.
Redding. He is with the Knox County Metro Area Fire Department, who donated the boats for them to go carry the wreaths across the pond.
And you can see the Knox County Rescue there with the box of wreaths.
And that's about a quarter of a mile hiking up that beach there to get up to where the trail even started.
Yeah, that's a heck of a beach right there. And sometimes a single person will, or a couple will take a wreath to a cemetery. Other times it's a group. And sometimes there are these nice headstones, very legible. And other times everyone's been in the park. You have this, and this is the Jonas Jenkins grave. It's a solo grave at Mingus Creek, above Mingus Mill in North Carolina. And this is one of the probably more difficult. This hike involves about a mile off trail. And these are the directions Frank has written down. And when Frank puts in this, use of a GPS is recommended, I would listen to that right there. It's you can read some of this. It's about 3/4 of a mile, gradually move uphill and away from the creek. On the west side of the creek, continue another 1/4 mile. Cemeteries in a relatively flat area on the side of a hill. at an elevation of 3,220 feet. And we had was it a retired colonel that took the wreath in?
This, to Jonas Jenkins, yeah, he's
Yeah.
actually still active colonel that did it.
An active colonel in
Yeah,
the military.
Active, still active.
Um,
And had to use his GPS because the bushes and stuff don't blend. I mean, you have to walk through some bushes to even get through it, so. Yep, and he went back and had to do it twice because we had
Exactly,
to go pick
because
him up.
they have to be removed within 3 weeks from the time they're placed in the park. Park has been very, very gracious to let us do this in the first place, but then we have to hold up our responsibility to get them removed. So the Reach Across America is one, the other is the Flag Day. And Flag Day, June 14th. But we had a first program at Elkmont last year to pass flags out. We had all the people, all the different branches of the service were there, signing people up to help and passed out the flags, and everybody had their directions and their walking orders of where to go. So that's the two main events that we're doing with this database, besides adding new ones and making sure we remember them. And as Marilyn likes to say, a veteran dies twice. Once when they actually die, and the second time when they're forgotten. And so when a flag or a wreath is taken to a grave, we always want to recognize their service and say their name so they are not forgotten. And nothing is complete without, some of the individuals. It's nice to talk about numbers and big numbers, but it all boils down to individuals and their stories. And that's something on the database. We have probably about 6 or 7 stories that the family has written, but we need more of those to add to the database. That's what's going to make it complete and compelling to tell the individual story. Henry Bohannon, again, the Revolutionary veteran, private in the 1st Regiment, Continental Line, Light Dragoons. He had 300 acres in Virginia that he never redeemed, and moved to Sevier County in 1801 and got a 150-acre tract for $1 an acre, basically. And he's buried at the Whaley Cemetery. And for those of you who've not been to the Whaley Cemetery, it's not a very hard hike, but it is a beautifully maintained cemetery. It's still very active with families taking care of it, and it is incredibly large. It's probably one of the largest in the park, Frank.
It is.
So it's, and again, Frank's directions will get you right to it. You can see the original headstone here, a military marker, stone marker here, and then the DAR emblem for his Revolutionary War service. Next is Ella Costner from Cott County. She was born, family was cabin where she was raised. It was around the Cosby campground. She became a nurse in World War I. She was in Texas working as a nurse. She also worked in the Panama Canal Zone. And when World War II hit, she joined up, but she had to fudge a little bit about her age because she was probably too old to enlist. But she worked in Hawaii and also Guam. Everyone knows she was early in the 70s, was made the poet laureate of the Smokies. And she's buried close to where she grew up in the Williamson Cemetery, which is off Snake Bend Ridge Trail, which leads out of the Cosby campground. But she is our only female, well, grave. There's another female veteran that is, we have her remains listed. And we are documenting the remains where they are, but we do not give the exact location for that. We just give a general area. And here's Ella's grave, and we got this young lady here learning about Ella's service and what it means to be a patriot, and passing along this knowledge to the next generations. Bass Shaw. Interesting story. This is a single grave up in the middle of the Dragon off 129 in Blount County. Private in the Confederate Army, but Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he'd probably been in the war long enough and he decided to go home until he was captured by some Confederates who were going to take him to trial in Asheville, North Carolina. But he was murdered on the way. Some say killed. It's more like murdered when you don't have a trial or anything. And this is his tombstone, probably one of the more interesting in the park. But let's talk about he was captured on Little Topo, which is in Monroe County, not far from the Tellico River, Little Tennessee, in between those two watersheds. He was killed here in this spot. Again, it's off 129, a good, not too far, along the old road there. And it talks about W.R. Abbott, who was part of the Kirkland Raiders. And then we've gone down here and talked about their sons, Jeff and Jim, were killed by the Kirkland Bushwhackers. Well, if you look at here, Bashaw's maiden name is Kirkland, so this is one of those family versus family things that were going on. I had relatives, Gormleys, up on the Little Tennessee River at Abrams Creek, and the brothers were split and fought for different sides, but it never came to this in our family anyway. But we think we have hard times now. I can't imagine what was going on in this area during that time. And Luke Lawson is probably one of my most favorite stories. Was a corporal in the 117th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Division in World War I. And this regiment, the division, was basically made up of National Guardsmen from East Tennessee, Georgia, North and South Carolina. And in fact, the commander of the regiment was from Knoxville. He was killed at the Battle of Piedmont and Beijing, October 1918, just a little over a month before the war ended. He was at the front line shooting machine guns with another Cage Cove soldier that was with him, Alex Gregory. He witnessed his buddy being killed. But before he left, Luke told his father that if he did die in the war, that he wanted to be brought home and buried in Cage Cove. Well, he was in France for a little over 3 years, 2.5 years. And the story of him coming into the cove, the body was brought back with a military escort to a place called Riverside, which is around the Kensal Springs area of Townsend. Was met there with a horse and wagon. They carried him over Rich Mountain Road. His dad wanted to make sure it was him and tried to get the soldiers there to let him open the casket to look, and he had to get a court order from Squire Shields to do it. He got it. It was proof that it was his son. They kind of rode him around the cove. Everybody knew Luke. He was a very likable young man. Some of the letters he wrote back to his cousin, he's asking about all kinds of people, and you could tell he was very involved in the community. Vic Wheels wrote an article about it in 1983, I think, and try to find that on the internet. It is a great story that Vic does much better justice to it than I have. He was buried in 1921 in the Methodist Cemetery. And this is his stone and also his bronze marker. And it's a very heavily visited cemetery, but he's right there on the path and is easily seen. And one of the things, if you see some veterans' stones, you'll see coins on them. And Maryland Childers found this out for us, that the coins on the veteran's grave, a penny you visited, a nickel you were in boot camp together, dime you served together, and a quarter you were there when they died. But, you know, there's quarters and nickels and dimes on this, and I doubt if anybody served with him or was in boot camp with him, but I think they put a more valuable coin on there because of the respect they have for him and to honor him even more. Money's taken off the graves and given to the Friends of the Smoky so they can keep some of the things going that they do. But that's all I have. Thank you very much. I mean, if anybody has any questions, we got 3 of the great people back here that put this all together, that if I don't know it, I will certainly call on them. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with where Fighting Billy Tipton's grave is?
Right?
You know, on Nalco Highway, across from Green Acres Flea Market.
Yes.
On the hill, it's up there, I think there's 5 graves up there. It's probably pretty much overgrown, so it's probably pretty hard to get to. And I think most of Tipton's case code Cindy.
From him there? That's
I
not
haven't
far from
been- I
Little
haven't
River.
been there.
Is the cemetery maintained?
No, I think it's pretty much overgrown. So probably on private property.
Well, people, even if it's on private property, ought to maintain it. We've done a cemetery in Alcoa that's owned by Alcoa Corporate, now Arconic, that is in the middle of a cow pasture that they were not good stewards of. There's no stones left, but we've done ground penetrating radar and know that there's 13 in there, and Frank has used some of his technology to find some quite a few more. The city of Alcoa recognized, and I think Arconic recognized, they need to be better stewards, and we're working on making that a park that's going to be accessible 2 or 3 times a year. Maryland?
That cemetery he's talking about, there's a Revolutionary War veteran, I believe that's buried in that cemetery.
And the one in Alcoa I was talking
The one, no, the one that's just across from Green Acres? I was wondering where it is.
Fighting Billy Tipton.
Yeah.
William Tipton.
Right, and I need to, I actually need to be able to figure out how to get contact of people that own that for our Revolutionary War project.
Well, I think there's a house.
Okay. I've looked up through there, go, how the heck is there been a big cemetery up there?
Well, the one I was talking about in Alcoa, we think there may be up to 5 Revolutionary War soldiers buried in that.
I think so.
And one in particular, Jonathan Weir, W-E-I-R, would be the 3rd and 4th great-grandfathers of the Presidents Bush. And then also another gentleman by Hunter. Most of them were Weir's brothers and sons. They all fought at Kings Mountain. But by honoring these veterans in the park, a lot of these graves hadn't been visited a whole lot over the years. They've not been recognized as a group. They've not had their names said in years, but I think we have to do more to recognize our veterans in the service. We'd not be here with our little meeting today without the sacrifices of the veterans in the past, and we cannot forget them. Yes, sir.
You've mentioned Civil War, and I saw a reference to the Revolutionary War. Are any grave sites noted for the Spanish-American War?
Yes. 3. And then I have an War of 1812 ancestor that's buried, Gormley's, Spanish-American War. I think we had a Mexican War veteran. World War I, World War II, Korea, through Vietnam. But like I said, with the 15 active cemeteries still in the park, there could be some more. Yes, sir.
So how is it determined an active versus an inactive?
That's the park's determination. Some of them are full and outside there's no room for any burials. Some have some stones in some areas, even though they're unmarked. And that's the whole problem with this, is there's gonna be so many we miss because all they have is a flagstone marker without any inscriptions on it. We don't know who they are. There's some that are buried close to where they lived and had just a little family plot, 3 or 4 graves. It could have been veterans. So it's important we recognize the ones that we know, but we also need to know that there's probably many more known only to God that are in the park.
In your records, you indicated that you did not put somebody in your database if you didn't have anything other than a family story or something like that. So is there something that determines what level of information qualifies the marker?
The military records, the marker is good. We'd like to have more, but we've included some that are in markers if we can find something else. But we've had a couple that were, 1 or 2 in particular, where their births of their birth and their death dates didn't correspond with what they were recognized for as being in the service. Sometimes it's a middle initial that's different. Sometimes they're outside, buried outside the park. We try to use the Fold 3, all the county records of military service. I know Inez Burns did a book in Blount County where she listed all the Revolutionary War of 1812 and these veterans in the 50s. But you know, we're probably never going to get everybody again because so much has been lost over time. Yes, ma'am.
Doing my research, I have found U.S. Civil War soldiers' records and profiles. I have also found that for the other wars, where they are, and part of the time that's all the record I can find. I can find the grave, I can find the marker. But that's the only record I can find except what's on that marker.
And then sometimes their military service is not on their marker.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of times you just have to go by when they were born and when they died, and they'd be and pardon?
And you dig.
Yes, you do dig, and that's where the research comes in. But there's a lot out there. I don't know how anybody did anything before all this stuff was online. I mean, you would spend your life going to different libraries and different databases and everything else, but now so much can be documented online.
Some of the documentations, especially for the Revolutionary War and War of 1812, is documented by their pensions.
Yes, pension
So there
papers are
wasn't any
great.
other kind of record except that their widow had gotten a pension, or they had gotten a pension, and that was how it was
Or if
documented.
the pension was even denied.
Right, exactly.
But there's the stuff is out there, and Fold 3 is a great place to start. But then there's all these other databases too. I know the Park Service organization has some Civil War records of individuals. Yes, sir.
But Tennessee is a peculiar, I use that word state, because if you fought for the North, you went to Kentucky to sign up. If you fought for the South, you went to North Carolina to sign up.
Yep.
And so the records are not very accessible, and you really don't know where you're looking.
A lot of times they have where their hometown was on some of those records, and
Some of
it
them.
could be done.
And also, some of them were conscripted as CSA, who later managed to get away and join the Union.
Yes.
And the names, the CSA name and the Union name, I think some of them didn't give their correct names.
You were right 100%, and some left the Union more than once to sign up and get bonuses and try to get in another theater of war. It's just a horrible, horrible time. It's amazing that they were able to document as much as has been documented. Marilyn?
May I add one thing else we're doing with the
Please.
database? Is that we, our organization, Veterans Heritage Site Foundation, we adopted these veterans that are in the park. And part of that is not only for the Wreaths Across America and the flags, but we also are going to have a maintenance of these headstones. As Joe mentioned, some of them you can't read, and I have my hikers going there and they're spending 30 or 40 minutes trying to find a grave because they can't read their name. So our third part of our project for adopting them is the maintenance. We had our first maintenance program yesterday where we went to Tritt Cemetery and we cleaned 24 veterans' graves, and some of them were barely readable, and now we'll be able to read those graves. And not only that, but we also marked whether they had a military grave, headstone or footstone, because if they don't, then our group is going to be ordering from the VA footstones for to replace or to add to that, so that when you go in that cemetery, it'll be readily identified as a veteran. And that's that's an additional part that we're doing as well, besides the wreaths and the flags. Thank you.
All right, then I would like to thank Joe. Let's give Joe a hand for the presentation. Now I'd like to give a second hand to this team and what they're doing. We have a lot of folks in this room that maybe you're not internet savvy yet, but let me assure you that this generation that we have now, the younger folks, if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist. And if you don't believe that, just wait and you'll find that it's true, because your history will be forgotten. We now live in a digital world, and if you don't have your family records digitized, either through genealogy records or through your own efforts yourself, in some way that they remain in some database or somewhere on the cloud that's accessible, trust me, you're just going to be forgotten.
And as a segue for that,
Yes.
for those of you that are not aware, we have a significant database that was started, I don't know, 10 plus years ago. It started, our organization started it with Beckwith, I believe, with David Beckwith, in addition to that, Rob Beckwith.
Yeah.
And that has, and then Larry Fox added his names, and we've got something like 2.5 million names in that database that's available to members of our organization to access. And Jim Everhart, our webmaster and current genealogist, would love for you to contact him so that if you've got your family records and you would like to get them recorded, you can add those to that database. And I guess that's too much on that. You can contact me, or you can go to our website to find Jim Everhart's name. In addition, we have the Sevier County records, the cemetery records there, that have that information. And there's also a database that's accessible to non-members as well as members to the public for individuals that served in the military in Sevier County, but also any other county. That information can be added to. It's a little bit competitive with what you've got, but of course you find that you can get information from both websites to fully flesh out the individual with that information. So that's available for you as well. And oh, by the way, we have our Facebook page where you can find information about this meeting and other meetings.
All right, I'd like for you also to stay around for some refreshments here over the next 15 minutes or so. That's a great idea.